You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 87 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Today's show, we've got I don't want to say a special guest because he's already been on the show. He was on the show a couple of weeks ago, but we do have a guest, Mike Fryer. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
It's always good to have you back. If you guys haven't checked out, it's in the archives. We had a great discussion about his book, Goat Envy, which is still available on Amazon.com. Is it still only $4, Mike?
It is. For the ebook, it's $3.99. For the paperback, it's $8.99.
Okay, so for $4, you can get, any kind of reader on your phone, on your computer, on your tablet, whatever. For $4, it's an exceptional read. If you're interested in the history of the game, it's I'm not just saying that because I reached out to him after I read the book. I got him on the show and I had to plug his book. So check out that book once again, Mike. What is it?
It's called Goat Envy, and if you can get the website is goatenvybook.com. Mm-hmm. And the links for both the paperback and ebook are on the front page.
Fantastic. All right. So with that in mind, we're going to have a discussion centered around historical NBA topics, and more specifically, championship rings. Because for some reason, these have become a dirty word. And when I say for some reason, you and I both know the reason for this. It's because LeBron is quite weak when it comes to the championship argument when placed up against Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But what we have seen is the degrading or the devaluing from the media in the value of championships. Now, I wanted to ask you, when you were writing your book, well, I don't want to get back on the book. I've already done an entire episode based on it. But when you were writing the book, even prior to writing the book, how much did you value championships?
I mean, like I said, I've always believed in, when it comes to debating the GOAT, for me, always number one, it was eye test, always. And the per game analytics kind of pair with that. But in the greater argument, most people want to expand that to include certain things. And I've always said, well, if we're going to include certain things, it should be all things. And championship rings should be a part of that. And should carry as much weight as other things that people want to cherry pick in and out as their narratives or arguments change. I've always said, well, if we're going to include this, let's include it all the time. Great example is the 90, and I didn't even talk about this much in the book. I don't even know if I don't think I mentioned it. Maybe one line in the narrative section, but, Michael lost in the 95 playoffs. Well, okay. Context tells you that he was gone for 75% of that season, and he came in and he was still rusty. He was great. But as far as being in championship mode in the playoffs, he, wasn't quite ready to win that finals again. If LeBron was placed in the same situation, how would his fan base treat that? So I'm like, okay, well, if we're going to count that, can we count all the finals that LeBron lost again? Can we go back to there and stop giving excuses then? If we're going to take context out over here, we must take it out over there. And if we're going to include it over here, we must include it over there. So for me, rings matter because everybody wants to cherry pick in things. I'm like, well, we're going to put in everything. I can live with the 95 loss to Orlando if I'm an MJ fan. Okay, fine. He lost. What'd he do? He won another three-peat after that. Kind of, because, so that ring thing kind of comes back to you. If you include it all, the rings matter quite a bit, because it's part of the game. It's part of the history of the game.
I would say that leading a team to a championship is the greatest feat an NBA player can do, that they can be a part of.
Absolutely.
Because it's an 82-game season, and on top of that, the playoffs is another season altogether, really. When you're getting that deep into the playoffs, we're talking, potentially nearly 30 games. Now that we have best of 7 in at least if you're going to the championship, you're at least playing 20 games. Even when the Warriors blitzed through the playoffs a couple of years ago, that was still nearly 20 games, and they had only lost one. So that's insane. The point that the point that I wanted to make, though, and we sort of touched on this in the previous episode, but I'm going to say it again, is playoff basketball is such an intensity. Because it's like, you know this from watching American football, the amount of strategy that goes into one game, just for week by week. You get that in NBA playoff games, and you have to play that same opponent 7 times, potentially 7 times. And the ability to overcome that, because of the line between winning and losing is so fine in the playoffs. So to be able to consistently overcome that against different opponents, you may be able to dominate a specific team, but your next opponent plays totally different. Do you have the versatility to overcome that? So I think that leading a team to a title, Finals MVP, I rate Finals MVPs more than I do regular season MVPs for that exact reason.
You know what? I was just thinking about this the other day. It's the number one stat. If you're going to include all stats in the GOAT debate, any debate you're having between two players, Finals MVP, there's no greater individual achievement in the NBA. There really can't be. Now, within context, how it, pertains to a certain player like Iguodala. Okay, that was nice. It was wonderful. I thought he deserved it. He played for his team. It was great. It was his greatest single achievement. It doesn't really go with the rest of his career. He's a great role player. At one time, he was a great starter. But
yep.
So there needs to be some context there, I think. But as pertaining to the greats all time, top 10, top 20 all time, it's the number one achievement. I mean, it's like a crown jewel, and MJ's got 6 of them, and it's unmatched, really.
The case in point for this, I think, is when you look at the 94 finals, Patrick Ewing versus Hakeem Olajuwon, and how differently we would look at both their careers had John Starks not shot 2 of 18 or whatever it was. It had nothing to do with Ewing. Ewing can't control whether Starks is going to just completely screw over his team, not intentionally, but at some point Riley's got to yank him.
Especially as a big man who didn't hold the ball 25 feet from the basket on every play. He really didn't have much of a choice there.
Exactly, right. The point I was going to make, though, is how differently do we look at Ewing had they have won in 94?
Oh, it would be vastly different. I mean, he gets today trashed because of the GOAT debate. There's this new school versus old head thing going on in the chat rooms and the Facebook debate groups and those types of things. But so you don't hear Patrick Ewing mentioned a lot, and when you do, it's usually in a negative light from new school fans who never got to watch him play, who think that big men somehow, well, when they're not talking about Russell versus MJ, but any other big man, it's like they're slow, they wouldn't translate to today, so they just trashed these guys, and I'm like, Patrick Ewing, I mean, was so great. He is up there. So you're right. The
fact that they do that further convinces me that they're not fans of the game.
No,
they're fans of particular players, maybe a team, but they're not fans. They don't respect the game at all, and that's disappointing. And it kind of actually sheds a bit of light into it as to why we get such idiotic comments like, "Oh, the NBA was full of plumbers," or in the 90s. If that's the case, then we're looking at an era of what? IT nerds. It's either one or the other. Just what you were saying before, the lack of standards. There's no consistency. There's absolutely no consistency. They'll apply standards and context for justification for their own players losing, and it's not just LeBron. It's also Golden State. They'll and Kobe fans as well will do this to a lesser extent. But I think they're starting to come around. They're starting to see it a little bit more as to how messed up this is.
It's funny you mentioned it. I mean, before LeBron really got going, and I would say I started really interacting with fans like in 2000. Right after that decision is really when the LeBron GOAT debate really started, because that's when his most ardent fans really started to defend the decision. I believe that's when it really became a mainstream debate. It really didn't have anything to do with what he had accomplished yet. It was really what he hadn't accomplished, the taste the bad taste that it left in the mouths of fans who were old school fans when he made his decision, and the new school fans said, "Hey, I don't like this. I'm 22 years old. I bounced around to 5 different jobs already. Why can't he leave and go to his best situation?" So it was a lot of that, a lot of cultural things that went into that. But before LeBron, it was Kobe's fans. I mean, they were so annoying. I mean, I ran into them every day in our gym, anywhere really, barbershop, doesn't matter. They were making the daily GOAT case for Kobe over MJ. And
what was their point? What was their main argument?
Well, they knew they couldn't compete with rings,
right?
Because Kobe simply was one short. It really just came out a lot of the same things, lots of hypotheticals, lots of context in, context out. I don't remember it as much as I remember, in real time, with
sure.
the LeBron debate. But it was, I'll tell you this, where there are similarities are when they would say, well, Kobe's just more athletic. Kind of like how LeBron fans will say, well, LeBron just makes everybody better.
Stop. Stop, you're hurting me, man.
It's like they create new categories for their guy, like basketball IQ, where all the greats, the top 20, top 50 greats, all have similar basketball IQs. I mean, and if you really want to get into basketball IQ, let's look at turnovers in the last few minutes of big games. Right. That's when I would the best IQs rise to the top, and I wouldn't put LeBron at the top of that list either. But there was lots of that. Like they would just say, like, "Well, Kobe's a better defender." Like, I'm like, that's not true though. I'm like, he's not even close to as good a defender. And you're hearing that more now. Like now you're seeing with Kobe, LeBron, and MJ fans. What I'm reading a lot is you'll see some of those things like, well, Kobe's definitely the most gifted and the most skilled out of the three. I'm like, whoa, wait. I was like, it's like the Kobe fans are coming back now because they're fighting LeBron fans along with MJ fans, but they make incoherent statements along the way. I'm like, whoa, man, you're giving me bad memories from like 10 years ago, and you've been saying this stuff for 10 years ago. Now you're bringing it back. And like, Michael was more skilled than Kobe. Kobe was the copy. I mean, come on. I mean,
the thing that struck out to me was Kobe's a better shooter.
No.
And the outside shooting. I never bought into that because I grew up with Kobe. Kobe was the guy that I grew up with, right? And same with Iverson. So if there's any nostalgia, it should be for him, for me. But I can't tell you how many games I saw him just jacking shots up. And to his credit, he sort of figured it out later on as well. Okay, if my shot's not on, I can go hit the glass. I can go to the glass. I can get rebounds. I can set screens. He would do that. He would sort of adapt his game later on. But the notion that he was a better shooter, that really irritated me.
It's simply not true. I mean, he shot 32.9% from three. Michael shot 32.7. So yes, if you want to say he's 0.02 of a point more, okay, great. To me, that's pretty equal.
Okay, but here's how I flip that around. Okay, we're talking about like the minute percentages here, by the way, but 32.9 is not a high percentage from three, and neither is 32.7 either, by the way. But let's compare how many times they would shoot the ball. Now, if Kobe shoots the ball 3 or 4 times more from 3-point range in a game, that's at that percentage. That's more detrimental than Jordan shooting at 1 time per game. At a slightly reduced clip because your team has more percentage. Jordan was so much better in the mid-range, and he was so much better. As Kobe understood the importance of foul shooting. I'll give him that. It's kind of strange that we have to put that as a footnote that he understands the importance of foul shooting. But Jordan was deadly from mid-range and facing up in the post. Now Kobe was later on too, but Kobe was a lot more. I don't know how to really describe this because I know how it is in my head. Kobe was a bit more of he was streakier, but Jordan was more consistent, but yet somehow streakier gets rewarded more than consistency. I don't get that. I would take consistency over that every single day of the week.
You're getting into the intricacies of the game, the nitty-gritty. It's the same thing with the rings. You're talking about things that either can't be quantified that really matter. Or, just those, it's kind of like those, like street rules or, it's like, hand signs in baseball, it's like unspoken rules, and you're getting into the nitty gritty of things and you're right. Phil Jackson said it best. He said the difference between Michael and Kobe was that Michael was a much more patient player. Mm-hmm. And now you're getting into more efficiency, and I would say that LeBron for a lot of his career, and this is why I have LeBron up there with Kobe, is he was a more efficient player. Now, I think the eras matter and rules and all those things, but, picking your shot, MJ was just so much better than Kobe at that. I mean, Kobe was just like, I'm going to chuck it. He was more like Melo, and I don't want to reduce Kobe. Like I said, Kobe's in my top 5 all time. But, he would just, like you said, it was streaky. He had a little bit of that Reggie Miller, and I'm like, if I miss 25 shots, I'm going to shoot the 26th one with confidence. That's the way Kobe was. MJ, I remember games watching MJ where he would be a little bit, like LeBron in some aspects, where you're waiting for him. Like, what's he waiting for? It wasn't like that he was shrinking from the moment, like late in the games or anything like that, because we know that that's not true about MJ. But early in the game, sometimes the shot just wasn't there. And MJ is like, okay, I'll just pass more right now and just get into the flow of the game more. And once he hit it, you're like, he's going to get his 30 points. You knew that growing up. It was like that 30-point mark. You're like, did MJ get 30 last night? You're checking the newspaper. It's like that was like the thing, and you always knew he'd get there, but he went there so many different ways. Whereas Kobe was like from the tip to the final buzzer, it was just like, I'm going to go hard to get my 25 points, and that's, so it was. Michael was a more efficient player, a more headsy player. There's no doubt about that. Absolutely not. And you got up a great point. When he shot more, it hurt his team more than, say, if MJ did at the same percentage. Well, Cowherd was making he was going off on a tangent about how MJ's game wouldn't translate to today's because he didn't shoot the three well, and he had so many years where he shot under 20 in the low 20s, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to look at the stats like I do. And I noticed something very, very interesting about MJ when it came to attempts with the three-point line. Now, we know from 94 to 98, they moved the three-point line up a little bit to encourage more three-point shooting because the game was locked in the mid-range and in the post during a big man era. So they were trying to unlock that a little bit. So I wanted to see what MJ did when he shot more threes than he did. So I looked at some of his percentage years when he shot like 52 threes or 18 threes or 53 threes. And then I'm like, whoa, he just shot 245 threes. I'm like, where did that come from? And then, 93, 100, 230, then 32 in a shortened year. And I'm like, okay. And then up to 260, 297. Then he went down to 126. And I'm like, there were times during MJ's career, and 2 of these years were at the current or old line before they moved it up. He shot 38.3% in the 4 years where he had 230 three-point attempts or more. 38 points. So his three-point percentage actually increased when he focused more on the three-point line and shot more threes. And I thought, usually a guy will either stay the same or actually go down a little bit as he continues to shoot. But MJ, incredibly efficient as he was, he actually shot a better percentage when he shot more three attempts. In 4 years, he had 230 attempts. And all the other ones were in the low hundreds. So, this narrative needs some context that MJ wasn't as good a three-point shooter as, Kobe or LeBron. Of course, I covered in the book that MJ's better in the finals and the postseason than LeBron at the three. But these thoughts that either guy compared to LeBron isn't as good a shooter three-point is kind of crazy to me. But within Kobe and Michael and they're very similar as a three-point shooter. And as far as the skill of shooting, MJ's just better. It's there's no arguing with the stats.
So, if I heard you right, by the way, that's some great information about him shooting. When he shoots more than 233s, it's 39%. But did I hear you right? Because I don't watch Colin Cowherd. I don't watch that garbage. People send it to me. But did he really say that Jordan wouldn't translate into today's game because he's not a three-point shooter? Do they really think that the NBA is just three-point shooting?
They do. And because they see so many threes flying up per game and because the game's gone away from the mid-range and the post, they think it's the best version of basketball. And I'm like, well, that's highly debatable. I wouldn't even argue that 90s ball is the best version. NBA is just, it's had eras where you had different styles of play. And to say that one is better than the other is a little crazy to me. Now, I will say this about the 90s. The 90s included more of the traditional positions on the basketball court. As you say, point guard, small forward, power forward, and center. Those are the actual 5 positions on the court. No era was better at utilizing each position as it was defined as the 90s. There's no doubt about that. When you had shooting guards, you had shooting guards. You didn't have point forwards or stretch forwards. Guys like Horace Grant trying to go out and shoot threes later. You didn't have that. They shot from 10 to 12 feet. They played close to the basket, and they rebounded, They protected the rim. So when, it's just, so when you put a slower guy out there shooting threes like Bosh, his rebounds are going to go down a little bit. One, he's playing with LeBron and Wade, so I get that. But, when you shoot close to the basket with Horace Grant, who was, I believe, 6'10", he's going to get more rebounds, So Bosh's skill of rebounding didn't lessen. It's just that when the three-point shot goes off the rim farther, Bosh is slower than the guards around him, so he's not going to get as many chase down rebounds, So there's a lot of that context that goes into it. But I would say, yeah, these guys, they're so focused on the three-point line. I mean, you're going to love this narrative. I mean, it had me laughing out loud. I mean, we didn't get to it last time, and actually it happened right before I went on the podcast, but we kind of ran out of time. But this was his thing. Colin Cowherd said, traditional basketball history, no qualifiers, no eras. He's like, this is my top 5. Magic, Jordan, LeBron, Bird.
In order?
Kareem. No, not in order. He just said this will be my starting 5. He said Magic, Jordan, LeBron, Bird, and Kareem. He said regardless of position or, any qualifiers, any era comparisons. He's like, that's my top 5 all time. Playing, my top 5. And I'm like, okay, I can get behind that, Mm-hmm. And then he said, well, if we're going to go to today's era, he goes, Curry, Kobe, of course he includes LeBron again.
Why would he go with LeBron then, if he's talking about shooting?
Exactly. This is the point I'm going to get to. He goes Curry, Kobe, LeBron, Bird. To his credit, he put Bird in there, and he put AD in there.
Wait, hold on. If it's all about shooting, why not Kevin Durant over LeBron?
Thank you. I don't know.
Why not Reggie Miller over Kobe?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. But then he would go more into the athletic. Why
not Bill Laimbeer over Anthony Davis?
Yeah, by the way,
I could go on all day with this.
I know. Like I said, he goes into the athleticism angle. He says that Kobe was more athletic than Mike, which is absolutely nuts.
What? Stop this. This is unbelievable. I can only take so much, Mike. What is he basing this on? NBA 2K ratings? Maybe, just maybe, the people that are writing these shows, because it's not, like, we all know they've got staffs and they put their name on it, so they're going to get the criticism. But maybe the people that, actually writing the content, they just sit around on NBA 2K. Oh, well, Kobe's got a higher athletic rating or whatever than Jordan's.
I see that a lot in the debate rooms. They're like, you see these guys. What do you think about this guy's rating? I'm like, you guys don't know anything about ratings. It's all make-believe. They're digital ratings from nerds in Silicon Valley. That's all it is. They gave LeBron like a 98 or a 99. I'm like, well, if we're including defense, if we're including defense, then there's no way he rates that high. Not right now in his career. No way.
This is breaking my heart, man. It's like espionage. It's basketball espionage.
Selling his idea. He said MJ's game would translate to today's game. These are just bullet points I saw. He said, and I wrote a personal note because I always write notes. And I say, does he not remember 80s MJ when the game was more spaced, more paced, and more up and down than it was in the 90s, which mirrors more of today's game. Less three-point shots, but it was much more spaced, less defense. He says that where's well, we talked about the 230 attempts. And then he goes, okay, so he said, this is what he said. He said, guys don't go from disastrous to great three-point shooting from early in their career to late in their career. He made that distinct point when he was talking about MJ. That's what made me go to to look at his actual attempts. And I found out that that was not true. He actually got better when he shot more. But he was trying to say that MJ wasn't a great three-point shooter. Again, ignoring all the stats. And so he says that 1 minute, okay? You don't go from disastrous to great. Then later he starts to go to LeBron, and he's starting, to your point about KD, why wouldn't KD be included instead of LeBron? He says, this is exactly what he says. He goes, he kind of catches himself. He didn't use the same word, disastrous, but he said he was glomming on LeBron. He was just going, gloating on LeBron. He's like, well, LeBron, by the way, he went from, and he kind of paused. He said, he went from poor to an incredibly efficient three-point shooter later in his career. I'm like, you just said 1 minute ago you don't go from disastrous to great as a three-point shooter, but then in excluding MJ from the argument and talking about LeBron, you say that he went from poor to incredibly effective. I'm like, this is insane. I mean, they both went from poor three-point shooters or maybe just below average to better three-point shooters later in career. That's the only, but again, Colin gets into these extreme arguments like you hear out of LeBron's fan base all the time, and he caught himself because he didn't use the same term, but he boxed himself in there, and I caught it. I was like, oh, you got to be kidding.
They surround themselves in a bubble, and I remember you were on the show and you were saying you wanted Nick Wright to have a discussion with Nick Wright. That's not going to happen because they'll be exposed. They know they'll be exposed brutally.
Exactly.
And they're smart to not engage with that. They'll engage with people that they think they can tear up. If someone just says 6 for 6, which, by the way, does not get discounted. 6 for 6 is real. It happened. Just because they stomp their feet and throw a Serena Williams tantrum doesn't mean that gets excluded.
It happened. He got 6 MVPs, Finals MVPs.
The reality of it as well is he didn't have to go anywhere to learn how to win. And I think, talk about, burning the tapes of the Orlando series. Nobody has ever tried to burn the tapes of the Orlando series.
Yeah.
I have never say, oh, that didn't happen. I will say that context has to be applied because someone missed 18 months because their father was murdered, and then they came back with no training camp in the middle of the season, resurrected that season for the Bulls. They were sitting at 500 before he came back. And then
people forget that, by the way. They forget they were a middling team.
They may not have even made the playoffs that year had he not returned.
13-4 down the stretch that year with MJ, who was rusty.
A rusty MJ. He had some great performances. He tore up the Knicks. He had game winners. He beat Orlando a couple of times. And then he got him out of the first round against some pretty tough, Larry Johnson, Alonzo Mourning, Charlotte Hornets team. And then sure, he ran into Orlando. To anybody that knows basketball, they know how good Penny Hardaway was. They know how good Shaq was. You mentioned it before. They had Horace Grant, Dennis Scott, Nick Anderson. Before the foul shooting in the NBA Finals, he was a very solid NBA player. Beyond that, they also had Brian Shaw. That team was loaded, and quite honestly, the Bulls let that get away from them. The Bulls probably should have beaten them. Without Dennis Rodman, they had Will Perdue and Tony Kukoc inside against Shaq. And Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan were good enough that Ron Harper was on that team, but he wasn't starting. He wasn't even playing a role for them. It was B.J. Armstrong that was still on that squad. And they should have beaten that team. They let that get away from them. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that's the value of Jordan. But then to his credit, he picked himself up, didn't make excuses, came back. Guess what he did? He didn't miss one game, by the way, during this stretch, which is unbelievable. At the age of 33, 34, 35, he won 3 MVPs, 3 Finals MVPs, 3 championships, 3 scoring titles, 3 All-NBA first-team selections. And that, I remember you commented on my Instagram saying that it was just a cherry on the sundae. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's the largest cherry in the history of mankind.
That's right. That's right. Well, I was going back to the fact that most people said that he was the GOAT after his first three-peat. Most people thought that because, again, with their eyes, they saw MJ as the great. It was the eye test. It was, okay, he got a three-peat. That's amazing. But he's simply the best basketball player we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And I was like, So when I hear people bring up 6 rings from LeBron's fan base, they start going to Robert Horry and, Bill Russell and all these guys. I'm like, you guys just don't know. I mean, the 6 rings isn't what made MJ the GOAT. The 6 rings it was just, like I said, it was
Rubber stamped it. Rubber stamped it. It sealed that up.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, it made it so unreachable almost, or at least the feeling was that it was so unreachable. And that's why MJ he's not just the number 1 basketball player all the time. He's number 1 amongst players all time in any sport. He's always been number 1 on Mount Rushmore. He's above Babe Ruth or anybody else you want to argue from the other sports. I know people are talking about, Serena Williams now, and I'm not saying she doesn't deserve to be in the conversation, but, come on. I mean, amongst the most popular sports in America, MJ's number 1 all time. I would say Serena's up there for sure, but
if Serena's up there, then Michael Phelps should be up there too.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, if you want to go to the other sports that a very small percentage of the public actually even cares about to watch, well, sure, I'm sure we could include other people as well, but when we're talking about the top 4 major sports, or historically boxing, which was very popular in our country for 80, 90 years,
Right.
It's like, MJ's number 1. So if you want to dethrone MJ, you've got to be willing to say that person is greater than Ali, Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, whoever it is that you have as your best baseball player.
How many people say that you're the Serena Williams of your field when you're the best?
Not many. Certainly not either. I mean, I know it's a big thing right now. She was. Hey, let's not go there. It was a temper tantrum. We'll leave it at that.
Anyway, as I was saying, how many people have called somebody, even the Muhammad Ali, or the Jim Thorpe, or the Michael Phelps, or the Tiger Woods? Nobody has ever said that. Jordan was the standard in all sports. I don't want us to turn into a Jordan love fest, but I will say this. I think people need to come to terms with it may be a Babe Ruth situation where it may be 100 years or even longer before we actually have a guy that we can compare him to legitimately.
On LeBron's side, they have to be open to the possibility that he's not the GOAT. And MJ fans need to be open to the possibility that somebody someday will come along and dethrone him. Sure. But you're right. Just because it's the next generation right after MJ played doesn't mean that the best player of that generation or the next 2 is automatically better just because the athletic narratives and those types of things. No, I mean, sometimes guys are just better who played decades ago, and those are facts. They're not, there's no way to get around that. There's the possibility one day, but you're right, it could be 100 years. I mean, and we all have to be open to that.
I hope it's not 100 years, by the way. I bet if you got a hold of Jordan and talked to him, I bet you he would hope that it's not 100 years. He didn't even like being called the greatest when he was playing. There's interviews of him when he clearly states that he's uncomfortable with it, and he says, well, I never got the chance to play against a Jerry West or a Bill Russell or a Wilt Chamberlain. I always liked the fact that, because if anyone could get up there and toot their own horn or just deflect the answer and say, well, that's what other people decide, he could say that. But he actually seemed a bit squirmish about it. You mentioned LeBron, and I wanted to talk to you about LeBron as well, because on the previous podcast we had, you said you had him in the top 5. Now, I know you've separated your list to exclude big men. Now, I'll grant you excluding big men, but where do you have him in your top 5 with the exclusion of big men, and who do you have him in front of?
Like I said, I still have not yet, and I know this might seem crazy to you, but for me, as I was writing the book, I was so focused on the direct comparison between MJ and LeBron. That was it. I was hyper-focused on the comparison. Now, obviously, in the book, I expanded the comparison to include Bryant's or Kobe's and Bird's and Magic's per game and analytics stats, and that taught me something about each guy. So it gave me a little bit more research on those guys because I've always been an eye test first guy. So I was so focused on that. I still haven't, and I was thinking about it. I was like, what would my top 5, my top 10 be? I know we talked after the podcast last time, like, where would and I gave you a list. And I went back and thought about it, like, based off of the whole pie argument, you're talking about player efficiency rating, to usage to rings. I'm still comfortable having LeBron in there when we include all the factors, the career longevity. When we include everything, I'm okay having LeBron at number 2. But then I started thinking, I'm like, but when you include the eye test along with it, and you really want to go to a true whole pie approach instead of just slices, the eye test has to have a slice in the pie. And I started thinking about that a little bit. And I didn't write down a list yet, but I started thinking, look, maybe it's Michael 1A and then the other 4 are like 1B. It's really hard for me, or tied for second, regardless of the numbers, because when I go to the eye test and I look at Kobe and LeBron, and I think about skill, not efficiency as much, but just skill. I'm looking at Kobe, I'm like, I feel like he's a more skilled basketball player than LeBron. As for all facets of the game, when you include defense, when you include the ability to get down in a defensive stance and slide your feet side to side and not get beat, relying on chase down blocks to for your defensive stat pattern, I think Kobe's better than LeBron. I mean, because I remember our conversation, you were kind of shocked. You were like, I know you had him. I won't spoil it for everybody. I know where you have him, but I was thinking, is he really better than Kobe as a basketball player? I mean, really? Could you say he was more patient? Sure. More efficient? I think absolutely. The numbers, okay, but sheer eye test. Is LeBron James better at basketball than Kobe Bryant on both ends of the court? I would say no. I don't think that 2 more assists per game changed that for me. I think that the skill of passing is somewhat overrated when people talk to it as it pertains to assists. Sometimes it's like hockey. I think they give you an assist if you. I don't know much about hockey, but you pass to one guy and the other guy passes it, I think you still get an assist. You don't get that in basketball. If you make the right pass and then the next one is the assist pass, nobody ever remembers you for that wonderful pass that you made within the offense, or that, if you pass a between the legs pass to one guy and then he dumps it off to the big man for a dunk, nobody remembers your between the legs pass. So when I think about that, and I think about just sheer eye test, Kobe, Magic, Bird, and LeBron to me are all very similarly ranked, but for different reasons, I would say. They're all different players. Each one's different from the other. But if you want to put a gun to my head, I will try to come to a list today on the podcast. I think that's kind of fun. But yes, with the whole pie, everything included, I would say LeBron, because of his stats, because of his longevity, which I do think matter, even his per game and analytics, blowing Kobe out of the water with those, I would say that, yes, he deserves to be in that number 2 slot. When I use just the eye test, and I weight that more heavily, like I think it really should, even though I don't for the book and I don't for everybody that involved, because most people don't include the eye test as a higher weighted slice of the pie. For me personally, if you're just asking my opinion, the eye test is it could be half the pie.
Well, let's be honest, though. Let's be honest. They don't use that because it goes against them. If the eye test was in their favor, my God, would they use it?
Oh, no. They try to from time to time. They'll say, and they come with the, my favorite line is, oh, come on, man. Yeah.
Wait. No. He's just bigger, stronger, faster. No, they do use it. He's bigger, stronger, faster, and therefore he can guard all 5 positions. So why doesn't he?
Exactly. And could he? And then you have to, again, us old heads, we go back to context. We go, could he guard Shaq? Absolutely not. Not on his best day. He could not guard Shaq.
He couldn't even guard Rajon Rondo.
Yeah, exactly. He couldn't guard JJ Barea. I mean, we saw that.
Oh, stop it.
That's a dagger. That's a twisting a knife. I know. He would be a plumber if he played in the 80s,
Then what is JJ Barea then? Now, the fact of the matter is, and I think people will clue in on it sooner or later, and it may not be until the next guy comes up. It may not be till Kevin Durant's really kicking the door down in terms of legacy. I think Durant's already passed LeBron as the best player in basketball.
Right now, yes, he's better.
Yeah, there's no question. You look at the performances from the last 2 finals, and you compare the performances of the last 2 finals. Kevin Durant served him up on a platter.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And why? And this is really gonna anger some LeBron fans. But before he went down to injury and went on his little temper tantrum with the Spurs, that year, and Shaq said this. He said, "I'm sorry." These were his exact words. He said, "I'm sorry. Kawhi's the best player in the game." And you know what? Before he went down to injury that year, he was the best player in the game. On defense and offense, I think that year there were 6 games where a player had, this was 2 years ago, six games in the entire NBA season where a guy had 35 points, 5 assists, and 5 steals. Kawhi had 5 out of the 6. That's how good he was on both ends of the court. Pre-injury, pre-temper tantrum with the Spurs. So, if you're asking me my opinion about who's better, Durant and Kawhi are better right now, skill-wise, than LeBron is at this point in his career. I would say he's older. He doesn't play defense anymore. But anyway, back to Durant. I agree with you. He's better, and his legacy, that's where you were going with it.
Yeah, but it's only a matter of time before his legacy surpasses LeBron's. The same way that LeBron's, I'm talking about public perception, the same way LeBron's legacy has surpassed Kobe's, right, in terms of public perception. Nobody talks about Kobe versus Jordan anymore. It's LeBron.
15, 20 years, people are going to look back and they're going to go, Kevin Durant beat LeBron how many times in the finals? How many final MVPs did Kevin Durant have? They're not going to care as much about the super team thing because they see the disingenuous argument from LeBron's fan base that he never played for super teams compared to KD. I think that all of that is going to be forgotten eventually because there's been an active movement to gloss over the fact that LeBron has bounced from good situation to good situation at his own behest. To make him.
I had somebody come onto my page the other day. I can't remember his name, but I remember the comment, and it was related to. Let's see if you get your head around this. Miami would not have been a playoff team without LeBron because the year that LeBron left, they didn't make the playoffs, right? So I was like, well, hold on a second. So just a little bit of context I added to it was, okay, they missed the playoffs by one stinking game in 2015, Miami. Chris Bosh missed more than half of the season because of his heart issues. Dwayne Wade missed 20-something games. And there was a plethora, and I love using that word, of other injuries that Miami went through. And they missed the playoffs by one stinking game. So if you're going to throw that criticism out there, saying that LeBron is that valuable to Miami because they missed the playoffs the next time without any context, then I am not going to apply any context whatsoever. And then I just finished it up by saying 3-6.
Yeah, exactly.
No context. No context.
Exactly. Because if you want to talk about value, and you want to, first off, value doesn't measure skill. In any way, I would say any way, shape, or form, but.
No, I'm with you on that, because you think about some of the players, some of the least talented players in NBA history, whether it's Ben Wallace or Dennis Rodman. What are their value in relation to their skill, as opposed to highly skilled players that, like, I don't know, Chuck Person, for example, a great shooter, great scorer, but what was his value as compared to that Dennis Rodman? No, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. I mean, like Chris Paul has incredible value to his teams. He's up there with win shares per game for 48 minutes. I mean, he's up there, but he's not the best point guard all time, because the eye test tells you something different. He's a great player, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think he'll be could be a top 20 player all time. I don't know, including bigs, maybe not, but he's up there, great player. But value over replacement and value, again, it doesn't really pertain as much to skill as other statistical categories. And then when you do use it, then go to 3-6 then. If you're so valuable then to your team, then where's the above 50% winning percentage in the finals? Where's the value then? And then now let's talk about how it pertains to skill, And I saw his response to you. It had something to do with, I was reading it.
Oh, man.
It was so funny. I didn't read all of it. I don't remember all of it, but he said something about how, but Bosh only missed half the games. I'm talking about players who are injured. So he was frustrated that you brought that up because, one, it brought logical
Oh, no,
context.
I remember what he said. He said that he only missed a couple of games.
Yeah, it was half
A couple! A couple! It was 44 games! He missed 44 games!
You know who else missed, I think, 44 games? I think it was that exactly, Scottie Pippen, he played 44 games in 98. 97, 98, Scottie missed almost half the season.
Yeah.
And people forget that, and that's why this guy doesn't like that argument either, because you bring that up as it pertains to Michael's, last ring. They go, oh, yeah, but he was still healthy. I'm like, no, really, the whole year, Scottie was banged up, even when he played. In the playoffs, his back was hurt. Dennis Rodman on a cycle, he was cycling behind the bench, and Pippen was laying down flat on the floor like Larry Bird in the 92 Dream Team. Couldn't move his back. And MJ's out there getting 45 points. Now, you want to talk about value, that's value. That, to me, means more than what your team did after you left. It's more value.
But just to further emphasize your point, what was Scottie Pippen after the 98 playoffs? He never made one All-Star team. His last All-Star appearance was 97. Because he missed 98. 99 was the lockout. And then when it was in Portland, he didn't make an All-Star team again. He was a shell of himself. And it was,
by the way, against the Lakers in the 2000 playoffs.
Yeah, he was still a great defensive player, but Kobe had his moments against him. And now, you did talk about Chris Paul, and you were talking about where he could rank all time.
Mm-hmm.
And now, we did start this show by talking about championship rings and their value. Now, I'm curious, and you can include bigs in this, but what are, say, the top 5 or the top 10 players of all time that have not won a championship ring, in your estimation?
I think number one has to be Karl Malone. He's just got the stats, the eye test for his position. Number one player all time that didn't win a championship, it's got to be Karl Malone. And it was heartbreaking for him and his fans that he got so close. And 98 was really his best shot. And like I said,
97 was close too. I think 97 was even closer than 98.
He was better in 97, but the situation was better in 98, I would say, because you had the banged up Scottie and Dennis Rodman, and you could tell they smelled blood in the water. When Stockton hit that 3 and put them up by 4 points with 38 seconds left?
Oh, up by 3. Yeah, they're up by
it was 3. And they were going to come back home, Game 7, Scotty's banged up, Dennis is banged up. I think that they would have been favored in that game, at home.
Well, they were favored heading into the series.
They were, because people understood the Bulls were getting old. I mean, the Bulls their top players were old. Let's be honest. In basketball years, the Bulls were old, and they were hurt. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say Karl Malone is number one. After that, I mean, it's you always want to pair Stockton with him because he has so many more assists than anybody else. I mean, he's got to be up there. Charles Barkley would be in my top 5. So I would definitely have those 3 in my top 5. There's a plethora of players, to borrow your word. Yeah, you could put up there skill-wise with the rest of the group. I mean, you've got a group of, I'll just run through some of them. You've got, Paul, Mullen, Bernard King, Alex English, Lanier, Pete Maravich, Gary Payton, which I think gets forgotten.
Oh, no, Payton has a ring.
Oh, wait, that's right. He did. He glommed onto one, didn't he? All right, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's why you don't hear him. Guys like Walt Bellamy, Westbrook, Thurman, Bing, Elgin Baylor, Gervin. I mean, Gervin and Baylor you could maybe put in your 5, but, I would put Ewing up there and Reggie Miller. Dominique, AI. I mean, there's so many guys. If I had a gun to my head, I mean, maybe I'm showing a little 90s bias here, but Malone and Stockton definitely, Barkley for sure. Those 3, I don't even know if those 3 are debatable. I think they have to be in the top 5.
The point I want to make to you is, from your list, which I agree with you, Barkley, Stockton, Malone, Ewing, Reggie Miller, Dominique Wilkins.
Yes.
What do they all have in common?
They all played in MJ's era. They were denied because of MJ's greatness. I hate to say it. It's true. 6-0 happened.
You can't argue with that, right? You
really can't. And Dominique, he was affected a little bit more by Bird, too, and Magic. But all those other guys, I mean, it was because they ran into MJ. And it's funny enough, even though they didn't win, now Reggie ran into Shaq and Kobe, so, and it was close series. But,
let's be honest, though, that wasn't the best Pacer team, though. The best Pacer team was 98.
I agree. 98's team was much better, and they really took the Bulls to the limit. I mean, they really did. I remember watching that game, like, they could lose. The Bulls could lose. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying at home, and then they went on that run, but after being down early. But, yeah, Reggie Miller, man, I mean, the point I was making is that those teams, when MJ left the East, they just went to the finals.
Yeah, a remarkable coincidence, right? The Knicks went to the finals, the Pacers went to the finals.
Isn't that something? And so Reggie, later in his career, he ran into Shaq and Kobe. He wasn't going to win, but it was close. And then you saw Ewing run into prime, and I mean prime, Hakeem, and what are you going to say? I mean, Shaq ran into Hakeem too and showed him how to play the center position.
That blew my mind when I was coming up with my own list. When you look at the greats that haven't won rings, about 60% of the all-time greats that haven't won championships are as a result of Jordan.
Absolutely.
And then it got me thinking that the point that I really wanted to emphasize is when people say that Jordan didn't face competition, it's because I know it's unbelievable. The reason they say that is because these guys never won.
That's it's a great point. It's a great point.
Because this is the point I was going to make to you earlier about Ewing. How differently do we look at Patrick Ewing if he had won in either 92, 93, or 94? How differently do we look at Barkley if he wins in 93? Karl Malone, my God, if the Utah Jazz came back from 3-1 in 98 because they were down 3-1. Karl Malone had that unbelievable performance in Game 5 in Chicago. I think it was 39 points. Which is a lot. That was like half the team's points. So that's like scoring 60 points in today's game, right? If they were able to come back in that situation, in that circumstance, how differently do we look at Malone? How differently do we look at Jordan, too, if that had happened to him?
And that's where I go back to LeBron. I'm like, well, would it be better if MJ was 4-2 in the finals? Well, I mean, because you're validating the competition levels that these guys played against based off of the rings that they won, and then when you tell me that Michael's rings don't matter, I'm like, would 4 rings matter more than 6 if he went 4-2? Would it validate his competition? It's an asinine argument for me.
But they contradict themselves big time because then they'll turn around and say, well, Jordan lost in the first round to Larry Bird.
Oh, gosh, stop it. And a young Michael Jordan.
I know, right? Well, I mean, he had Dave Corzine. He should have really... That was better than Kevin McHale and Dennis Johnson. And
37-year-old George Gervin, too.
Now, what are your thoughts heading into this season?
Yeah, when it comes to contemporary basketball, it's so frustrating because there are only a few teams that can really win it. That's just my opinion. It's so loaded at the top. I think it got more balanced this year with Kawhi coming over to the East. I think that losing LeBron, the East didn't lose a step at all in the West. I really don't. Other than LeBron was added to the West. But his vacancy was filled by Kawhi. So with that in mind, I looked at some of the other lists that are out there. I wanted to compare, and I was shocked at how high they had some teams and how low they had others. But obviously Golden State's got to be number 1 heading into the season. And then I would have Houston and Boston as kind of, if Golden State's 1, those 2 are tied for 2. I just don't believe, like I said, I know they had Golden State against the ropes, and I don't think Golden State is that much better than these teams. I just don't buy into the narratives. Now, when you look at the roster, you're like, oh my gosh, it's got 5 All-Stars. Okay, I get that. But when you look at the reality, Houston almost beat them last year.
They should have beat them. They should have.
And Chris Paul got hurt. And
it wasn't a bad shooting performance. It was just Chris Paul got injured.
Yeah, so I don't think that Golden State's unbeatable by any stretch. That's a LeBron fan narrative that has just polluted all of the NBA analysis from top analysts all over the country, that they're so good that nobody can beat them. It's absolute garbage. But they are number 1. Houston and Boston, I would definitely put tied for second, and I tend to say Boston, just because healthy Kyrie, healthy Hayward. I'm like, with Tatum, who I think is going to be a superstar. I just think that they're going to be really well-rounded if they stay healthy. After that, I got the Lakers. Sorry, LeBron fans. You hate it when we raise the expectations, but I'm sorry. They're going to be third in the West this year. If they finish lower than that, then what does that say about LeBron James?
Really? No. You've got them ahead of Oklahoma.
I do, and I'll tell you why. It's because, one, I look at age. The Lakers were very young last year. They've got a whole year of experience underneath them now, and either they were first or second in fast break points last year. You add one of the top 5 players all time, in my opinion, to that roster, who's still at the very end of his prime. Yeah, I think that they're better than Oklahoma City. Yeah, because those guys are going to play great with LeBron. And he's going to play in the post, which I think is genius on the if that's true, if that's what happens, Magic's very smart. Because with the defensive 3 seconds, if you put LeBron James a foot above the block and 3 feet outside the paint, you can't double him. Because you're going to be caught in no man's land in defensive 3 second zone. And so you can't bring over the other big, if there is a big in today's game, but you can't bring over the opposite side of the court to double unless they come from the top. You're going to have guys shooting threes out there. Now, they do lack some three-point shooting, but there's going to be so much spacing for those young athletic guys who do great in the fast break game when you actually have to finally commit to LeBron and you can't just play a zone on him because he's playing on the block. You're going to have so much spacing there. It's going to be like fast break game for those guys. You're going to have 4-on-3.
I'm so confused, though, man. I'm so confused. I thought the NBA was all about three-point shooting.
Exactly, right? Well, Magic believes otherwise. Just like Nate McMillan did last year when they almost beat the Cavs. You can still win playing 90s ball if you do it smartly.
Right. Here's my counter, though, to the Lakers. Put them a lot further down in the West alone, not even in the NBA. We've never seen LeBron consistently post up. We've seen him post up at times. And he does have tools in the post. He has good footwork. Obviously, he's got the size to really move anybody. We haven't seen really a jump hook. We've seen a little bit of a sweeping fadeaway, almost similar to Hakeem Olajuwon's fadeaway. Not like Jordan's fadeaway, but that little, where he's really drifting and he shoots the ball from the near the top of his...
Yes, I agree. Yes.
But when I look at what he has been successful in the past, it's when he's been surrounded by shooters and he's got the ball in his hands. Now, I agree with you, he will go into the post if he has a smaller guy on him. But you could do what Indiana did and simply put a bigger guy on him and then force him out on the perimeter. And then he forces him out on the perimeter because then he wants to blow by the guy. Now, yes, that's a mismatch. However, it allows you to recover as a team defensively. And they don't have the shooters. Yeah, Lonzo Ball. Okay, Ingram has shown the ability at times to shoot, but he's not a catch-and-shoot guy. He's a create-off-the-dribble shooter. Same with Kuzma. So unless if they make a trade, I can't put them ahead of Oklahoma or Utah or even the Pelicans, for that matter.
I do like Utah. And I agree. I wouldn't say it's a solid 4 I have for the Lakers being the 4th best team in the league. I would say in the power rankings. Because I think ESPN had them at 8 or 9. I thought that was a little too low for them. Like I said, I believe in LeBron. Unlike LeBron's fan base, it's kind of funny. I believe in him. Now, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I have expectations for the guy. He's really great. So they always tell me how great he is. I'm like, well, if he is that great, then I think number 4.
Why are you making excuses for him?
Exactly. And I'm like, but I do see the caveats with playing in the post for LeBron. He's always been the guy with the ball in his hands the majority of the game. Had a high, I think he's 6 all-time in usage. The guy, I mean, he likes to play from the three-point line and in, 25 and in. So, outside the three-point line. So, that's where he's lived his whole career. I have my doubts. I will say this about LeBron, because you've got a good point. He's starting to develop a nice little fadeaway, like Hakeem's was, but he doesn't have post moves. Like, and I don't want to bring this back to MJ too much, but just for comparison's sake, MJ's post moves, his skills were much better than LeBron's. That doesn't mean he's not as tall, so he's not going to get the little baby jump hook as much. But as far as the skill of making post moves, LeBron, he's not in my top 30 all time. He's not even close. Top 50. He just doesn't have the ability to play with his back to the basket as much. Now, in this era, that gets glossed over a little bit because, there's no bigs under there anymore. But you're right. If you bring a big on him, I can see some problems with this experiment. And it is an experiment. I think Magic's right. If you want to beat Golden State, you got to do it this way if you don't have shooters. So I know what he's thinking. Grind the game down a little bit, play 90s era ball a little bit more. But is it going to work? Man, it's a big question mark. It's a great point. Great point.
Who have you got after the Lakers?
Toronto. I have Toronto because I don't believe DeMar DeRozan is anywhere close to the player that Kawhi Leonard is. I think Kawhi makes them, if he's healthy, and they have their same team around him, they're number 2 in the East easily. I don't even think it's close.
What about Philly?
Philly I have after Toronto, but I would say there's a gap between Toronto and Philly. Like I said, Philly is still young. They're still young, and again, until Ben Simmons can show he can shoot outside of a dunk, I don't know if they can beat a Toronto team with Kawhi Leonard if Kawhi is healthy. Obviously, if he's not, Toronto's not even on the map anywhere. But with that team around him, I think they're number 2 in the East, and I think that the Final Four most likely could exclude the Lakers. Could be Houston out too. I would say Golden State, either Houston or the Lakers, and then I would have Boston and Toronto in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then after that, there's a lot of intriguing teams. Philly I have at 6. Utah I have at 7. And I would say they would be tied. I really like what Utah. And then I have OKC after Utah. Until Westbrook does it, I don't believe it. I know he got there earlier when he had Durant, but until he can prove to me that he can lead a team past like a Lakers, say in the Western Conference semis, I just don't believe it. Much like I did with DeRozan and Lowry. Until you do something, I don't believe that you can do it. And I have them at 8.
Well, in all fairness to him, and people say I'm a big defender of Westbrook, to a point. I mean, I do like the intensity that he plays with, so there is some validity there. I do defend it probably a little bit more than other players. But in all fairness to him, he's had to readjust his game 3 times now. In college, he was a 2-guard. Then he had to become a point guard. And then Durant left. And now he's had to essentially become a hybrid with scoring and scoring. And now he has to readjust it again back to being a point guard because he's now got Paul George alongside him. That's kind of difficult to do. But
that's good context to add to Westbrook. The only problems I ever had with Westbrook was when he actually did play with Durant. And I'm watching him chuck up airbag. It's almost not fair to him. Like, just as they were getting going and they had Golden State down 3-1, he still hadn't made that full transition to knowing what it meant to be a point guard. And he was chucking it, and I'm watching Durant. Like I said, I think Durant left not only because he wanted an easier path to winning the finals. I think that I remember that series late in the series. I'm watching Westbrook chuck up these bad shots, in my opinion, bad basketball shots. And I'm looking at this, one of the greatest scorers of all time, even at that time, Durant. I'm like, he's not getting as many shots as he needs to down the stretch. So that always worries me about Westbrook in the future. Now, I will say this too. Because of your context, how do we know that Westbrook isn't on the verge of becoming that complete smart player like MJ did after 5 years in the league? Because I think MJ compared very much with Westbrook. A young MJ did. Even MJ said that himself. Yeah. He's like, that's me.
He did, yeah.
Yeah, 88, 89 MJ, that was Westbrook. Only he was 2 inches taller and he had more finesse.
And he could play defense a lot better, yeah.
It's more a player. But, he could be ready to make that next step. I'm just not ready to do it going into this season. I just need to see it first. And I'm not saying he can't or won't, but I would say these other teams to me, Kawhi, some of those guys, I would have them above him because, I've seen them do it on the biggest stage, or their youth is good. Like I said, Philly, Utah, OKC, they're all very close. I mean, how can you tell?
Yeah, well, that's the thing too. I mean, we don't know. It's all guessing. Especially when you talk about Kawhi Leonard, because we don't even know if he's going to finish the season there. Toronto may panic and end up trading him or something like that if they can't get him to re-sign an extension, or at least give a verbal agreement that he will. Getting back to the Westbrook discussion, here's why I got a little bit of confidence in. Okay, they lost Durant 1 year, and that team shouldn't have even made the playoffs the next year. It was because of him averaging a triple-double that they actually did make the playoffs.
Absolutely.
And then the season after, they bring in Paul George, but then just before training camp, they made the trade for Carmelo.
Yeah.
And so the team, they were sort of scrambling to try and fit these pieces together. Once again, it's not NBA 2K. You can't just, okay, I made this trade, now I can just use Carmelo, ISO. No, these guys need to mesh, right?
Yeah, Melo doesn't mesh with anybody, by the way. So, yeah.
But in all fairness, Westbrook doesn't have that Chris Paul, John Stockton, Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson ability at the point guard position.
Yeah.
To adapt his game to fit the strengths of scorers such as Carmelo.
It would be really nice if they could find a point guard to bring the ball up.
Well, they brought in Schroeder. He's not a great point guard, but he's not that bad either. I've got...
Yeah.
And I said in the previous podcast that the Schroeder-Westbrook combination reminds me a lot of Chris Paul, James Harden combination.
Yeah.
In terms of the roles they're going to play, it'll be your turn, my turn. Okay, you want me to work off the ball? You bring the ball up, and then you see Westbrook work off the ball, and vice versa. So I think there is definitely potential there for them to go deep in the playoffs, not just make it to the first round. I put it this way: if you were to line up the teams currently constructed, the Thunder versus the Lakers, I think the Thunder win in 5.
Oh wow! I like I said, there's a lot of improvements on both sides for me. Mm-hmm. It would be a great series. That's the series I want to see, by the way, in the West. I would love to see Westbrook and LeBron going at each other with Paul George and a bunch of other question marks on both teams. I mean, it's right. I was a big Paul George. I still am a big Paul George guy. I wish, this is the old head in me. I wish he had stayed in Indiana because, man, he was so close to beating the Heat. I mean, they were very close. I mean, that was a great series. I think it was third.
But hold on, I thought LeBron was a great defender. How was Paul George able to score those points?
Exactly, right? I mean, like, because he was eating very well against LeBron. Paul George to me is a two-way superstar. I mean, there's only a few of these guys in the league. He's incredible. So you're right. If it works out with the new point guard and Westbrook can maybe morph into more of a shooting guard role, I do think maybe they could beat the Lakers, sure. But like I said, I need to see that happen first. Maybe throughout the season my list might change going into the playoffs as far as whether or not I think they could beat the Lakers. But right now, because of LeBron's greatness and because of, like I said, Magic's pretty smart. I know what he's trying to build. He doesn't have a shooter, so he's trying to. It's a very tough niche to perfect. But if he can perfect that little niche, that 90s era ball, and play through LeBron in the post, it might just work out. But there's a lot of question marks there. But
I don't think that's a secret though in the NBA. You look at the Warriors even before they got Durant. You saw teams like Cleveland with Dellavedova and Mozgov and Tristan Thompson. They beat them up, even though they lost that series. They really got physical with them. Even prior in that playoffs when there was Memphis, with Zach Randolph, Marc Gasol, Tony Allen, Mike Conley, and then even more recently when you saw the Rockets. You look at all the offensive firepower from Eric Gordon to James Harden to Chris Paul to Capella to all those guys, right? Yeah. The way that the Rockets got back in that series, because they were down 2-1 with Game 4 in Golden State, the way they got back was playing incredibly tough defense and grinding it out.
PJ Tucker was incredibly effective in that. Didn't show up in the stats a lot, and I always said this, 90s ball had a guy like this on every team. That's why I always said players could play, because Tucker is not the most talented guy, but he's a grinder. And you're right, they beat them up. Tucker was just quick enough, and he was bumping those guys on screens, and the refs were letting them play. And
the funny thing about that series was we talked about Chris Paul getting injured. There was another big thing that happened, and that was they finally stopped. The pendulum swung the other way. So James Harden, notorious for flopping, right, and initiating contact and drawing fouls. Yes. But they started allowing Golden State to really hack him in Game 7, which was great timing, by the way. Perfect time to really start changing the way you officiate ball games. Game 7, I don't think Toronto's going to be as good because there's question marks around their coaching. Kyle Lowry's still on that team. Kawhi Leonard, if you give me Kawhi Leonard, who was third in the league in MVP a couple of seasons ago, the best defender this league has seen since probably Tony Allen, even prior to that, even you can go way back, because of his versatility defensively.
Man.
I could buy it if we see that. But as you would say about Westbrook, I need to see it because he just took a year off basketball. He really did.
Yeah, no, you're right. There are concerns there. I just think that the East is still, it's getting better because the younger teams are getting a little older. They're a year older, like Philly, and Boston is healthy. I mean, those two are great teams. I just think that if he is, and it's a big question mark. You're right. Right now, I'm kind of making a prediction on Toronto, maybe showing my bias for Kawhi a little bit because you're right. They have as many question marks as OKC or any of these other teams. I mean, as far as how Westbrook's going to actually play this year, you're right. It's a big concern. I just think that Toronto, if things go the way I think that they might, there's not a better player in the East than Kawhi Leonard. He's the best player in the East right now, day one.
What about Kyrie Irving if he's healthy?
If Kyrie, like I said, if Boston's healthy, that's why I have them tied with Houston for the second best team. Power rankings wise going in. I just, Kyrie, now how's he going to mesh with those young guys? I'll say this. We didn't see Kyrie scoring a whole lot before his injury. I mean, he got his points, but we saw a different Kyrie with this Boston.
Yeah, he was a leader.
He was a leader and he was a great passer and he was like top 5 in the league in steals. And I'm like, there's a complete player here just waiting to show everybody just how great he really is. And so, yeah, if he's healthy, man, I think Boston can give Golden State all they can handle in a finals.
I agree with that because I said this in a previous podcast as well. They match up so well with Golden State because you look at what Boston has. If Hayward is back and if Kyrie Irving is back, you have guys that are very fast for their positions. So I'm going to assume that they're going to go small and they're going to go Horford at center, Hayward playing the 4 spot as a stretch 4, and then you got Brown, Tatum, both guys based off their playoff performances should be all-stars. Kyrie Irving, and then also based off his playoff performance, Terry Rozier. And then you got Marcus Smart, So they've got so much speed, and you look at Golden State, and Golden State, they're highly skilled, they're passing, but they're not overly athletic.
No.
So Boston can really control the tempo of the ball
because they play,
and they can.
Yes, great.
Okay, you've got Curry. All right, sure, you've got Curry, but you've got Terry Rozier to throw at him. You've got Kyrie Irving, who's the Golden State killer, right? You've got, as you said, Marcus Smart, and then Kevin Durant, who can you throw at him? Hayward, you throw Brown at him, throw Tatum at him. You got DeMarcus Cousins up front. All right, but how's DeMarcus Cousins going to stay in front of an Al Horford? Al Horford should tear that matchup up.
Absolutely. No doubt in the post. Not even close.
And then when it comes down to coaching, I give a huge advantage to Brad Stevens over Steve Kerr.
He's the best, in my opinion, other than Pop, he's the best coach in the game. I mean, right now, that's not, yeah.
I think he's surpassed Popovich.
He could be in today's game, yes, he could be. Yeah.
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 Because I just look at everyone from Isaiah Thomas to Terry Rozier that steps into the Boston uniform, and they all of a sudden they look like all-stars and MVP candidates.
Yeah.
At some point, I've got to recognize that it might just, and then when they play elsewhere, like the Lakers or the Cavs, they're not that good.
Yeah.
And it's like, even Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder started to pick his game up a little bit in Utah, but in Cleveland, he no-showed. Maybe he was the superstar he was playing alongside, but regardless, I really like Boston's chances.
No,
Boston.
So who would you? I'll play host for a second if you don't mind. Who's going to win next year? What's the finals going to look like?
Well, I think Houston gets back to. I think they get to the finals. I think I can't let it go because I can't. Everyone seems to, as you said, a lot of LeBron fanboys out there trying to justify him losing in a sweep and 4-1 the previous year to Golden State. Like, oh, this team's untouchable. Pig's ass, they're untouchable because they were down 3-2, and it was an injury that bailed them out. It was Chris Paul getting injured. Yep. And without that injury, they would have lost. I'll take that to my grave.
Yeah.
And then when I look at Carmelo Anthony, and I think, we just saw what happened with Russell Westbrook. And for everything positive that I say about Russell Westbrook, there is a huge difference between playing with point guard Russell Westbrook and playing with point guard Chris Paul. Chris Paul can get you those touches and get you and manage the basketball and manage possessions and find people where they're comfortable. Russell Westbrook really doesn't have that yet.
No, he doesn't.
Everything that Westbrook does, from rebounding to defense to scoring, that's one thing he hasn't learned. And he may never learn that. It may just be something that you either have or you don't have. The sense of the game, the instincts for the game.
Yeah.
So I've got... And then, talk about a chip on the shoulder that the Rockets will have.
Oh,
They felt their window was closing last year. They're going to really be desperate this year to get over that line. So I think it'll be the Rockets versus the Celtics. But I think the Celtics, if they're healthy, I can't pick against that team. They've got 5 All-Stars.
Yeah.
5 legitimate All-Stars. Not All-Stars because, they play alongside each other like Draymond Green.
Yeah.
5 guys that should be All-Stars, plus the best coach in basketball.
Yeah.
And the speed of that team, I know it's a big call. I'm not saying it lightly. I'm not saying it so people click on the podcast or anything like that. I couldn't care less about that. But I'm just being, because, it's one thing to get them to click on it and listen to it, but if I'm grossly wrong, then I look like an idiot. The only thing that could unseat them is if Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons turn into Penny and Shaq, or we see a trade happen where, say, Kawhi Leonard gets traded to Indiana for nothing.
That would be amazing.
That would be great. That would be fantastic. Oladipo and Kawhi Leonard, I would love that. I would love that so much because Nate McMillan's a great coach.
Yeah,
he would figure that out.
And he fits Kawhi's skill set as a coach. That would be a great duo right there. No doubt about that. No doubt.
So let me throw it back to you though. You picked your Final Four. Who do you think will end up winning out of your 4?
I think that it's going to be, and maybe this is more what I want to see, because it's really hard to ignore your point about Houston being up 3-2. And let's be honest, teams, it's really hard to three-peat. Really hard to three-peat. Mm-hmm. And as great as Golden State is, they could take that step back. I don't doubt that. But I'm going to say that Houston, Golden State will be very close. But I think it's going to be Golden State and Boston. And I agree with you. I think that Boston wins the 2018-19 season. I just, like you said, from coaching to not just their starters either. Look at their bench. Their bench is the best. I would say going into the season, it's the best in basketball. And I would say it rivals Golden State's bench. And I mean,
and then they have 5 All-Stars starting.
And like I said, and because of their bench, it's their overall team defense that I think wins them the finals this year. And I think Kyrie separates himself a little bit for his legacy. I think it's a big thing. Now, I will say this. I'm leaving the door open, too, for Durant finally getting more credit than he's even getting now. It could be an epic finals. I mean, if those two face each other, you could see a legacy-defining series for Kevin Durant. And I mean, not just another finals MVP. I'm talking about Game 6, Game 7, making the shot, being the guy. Because we've been seeing him making them in Game 3 the last 2 years. We're talking about big-time pressure. Golden State and Kerr, they are going to Durant in those situations. I would love to see him in a meaningful Game 6 or 7, either save his team from elimination, get to a Game 7, or win the finals with 30 seconds left, hitting a shot like that. We could see that, and I almost want to see it because it will finally give him his due. I don't like his move to Golden State. I thought it was horrible. It's just these guys today. But again, you're talking about LeBron too. Although the whole super team era, I don't like it. But if you're going to have super teams and he's going to be in it, don't look past 2 finals MVPs. And if he gets 3 and it's this year and it's against Boston, and I think Boston's going to give him everything they can handle, this could cement his legacy as a man. He could start creeping into that top 6 all time. But somebody's going to have to get butted out, And but my hunch is, my gut tells me that doesn't happen, that Boston wins either against Golden State or Houston. But I think Boston's for me, they're the favorite this year. Just because you have the tiredness, the exhaustion of the Golden State thing. Are they going to take that step back that other franchises have in the past? And with the emergence of a young, really talented, great coach Celtics team, I just don't know if they can overcome the Celtics. I don't see it. And I don't believe in Mike D'Antoni to win a championship yet. So, like I said,
he was close last year. I mean, come on, he was unbelievably close last year.
I know he was. I'm not a D'Antoni hater. I didn't believe much in his style of play in the 2000s because you still had a slower paced game then, and I thought it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. I didn't think it was real. I thought that Stoudemire and Nash were great, but I didn't think that could win that. And even now, even though today's game is much more conducive to D'Antoni's coaching style, I think that you just have two better rosters in Golden State and Boston still. And I just don't know if he can coach that team to a champion.
In all fairness to D'Antoni, though, he did change his philosophy for the Warriors. He didn't just say, we're just going to outscore.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I don't want to be overly critical of him. He did change. They played that game at a slower pace, and because I think that, he showed a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's kind of prove it for me, but, that gives you almost enough to say maybe he could because that took look, when I played, and I don't want to do a glory story, but it's the only thing I could think of. When we won our national championship in 2002, our coach was a legendary coach. I think he ended up with over 800 wins. I mean, Coach Reynolds he's a legend in Division III basketball. Always played man-to-man. Always ran the same. He was running the same sets in the 70s on offense, and we ran them and won the championship on them. But we were playing in the Final Four, the semifinal, and we were getting beat by like 8 at halftime, and 6 or 8 points. And this team was really good. We were playing Carthage, and we went to a zone in the second half, and it just changed the complexity of the game, and we ended up winning by 4. But it was the coaching. We had great players. We had the National Player of the Year, but that coaching decision to go away from the zone. We played zone maybe 3 times all year for maybe a quarter. For him to go to a zone showed that depth that he had as a coach, and ultimately led to his first championship. So, could D'Antoni be on the precipice of that? I think it's fair. Based off of what he did last year. I think that's a fair feather in his cap, going in.
If I could address one thing, though, you were saying about Durant, and maybe the time is that will set the stage for him to grab the moment, to seize the moment. You said before about Westbrook showing you, like you have to see it. And the same applies to me with Durant in those situations too, because it wasn't just Westbrook choking in Game 6 against the Warriors when they were both on the Thunder. We've seen Durant come up pretty small as well in pressure situations.
I'm only going based solely off of him taking the bull by the horns against LeBron last 2 years. But again, the context shows, I guess for me, he's done more than Westbrook. Whether that's fair to Westbrook because of the team situations, it's probably not. But I still saw him taking the big shot. And for me, it was not Game 3 last year. It was Game 3 the year before. When not only that, but I think he scored I think the Lakers or the Cavs went 0 for down the stretch the last 3 minutes. And I think he had 9 or 11 points in the last couple of minutes there. And with that shot, and I'm like, that was a big finals moment because the Cavs went on to win the next game. And looking back, I'm like, that would have been a really great series had the Cavs and LeBron actually
defended home court
and won that Game 3. Durant is the one that won that series, and that 3-minute stretch there was incredible. And I haven't seen Westbrook do that. And I'm like, now I'd like to see it a little later on in the finals against a really talented Boston team. I think again it sets up for that. Can he do it? I don't know, but I would certainly like to see that scenario play out.
Who do you think the league MVP will be? I'm leaning towards Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I think Kyrie wins the MVP. I think I saw it somewhere else. I agree with that 100%. I think if he's healthy all year and the way he was playing last year, as far as his value to his team and how he changed his game a little bit before he went down, I think that this could be an MVP season for him. But it's going to be not in all the stat categories. It's going to be more like it'll be greater than what Nash's numbers were when he won it. But I think that because he'll average 20 plus a game, but I think that it's going to be like more of an eye test thing for the voters. I think it's
Sure.
wow, this guy's got the top team in the East, and look at how he's playing. So I agree with you.
Right.
You know what? I hate to say this. I just don't kill me for this. I think Durant may be due for one if he can get his numbers up a little bit, but LeBron, until I see it, it's kind of like I almost have to be convinced he won't win the MVP. He's going to have a lot of opportunities for more assists and more rebounds next year. And I feel like there's this huge push from everybody at ESPN and some of TNT, and I just don't know if they're just so interested in getting him that fifth MVP. It's hard for me to say that he won't win it if his numbers are anything comparable to what they were this year. Almost like
I'm not gonna kill you for that. No, I agree. He's probably right up there. He's probably the favorite to win MVP. I just think Kyrie.
I think Kyrie, if his numbers are less than LeBron, but they're number one in the East, and say the Lakers are anywhere between 3 and 6 in the West, I think Kyrie could deserve it if he plays the way he did before his injury. But I just feel like the MVP voting is such a political thing.
Yeah, it's like the story behind it. It's not even the production anymore. Because look at the differences between Westbrook winning it a couple of years ago as to not even being All NBA first team.
Yeah,
he averaged triple-double in both those situations. So,
yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. I also think Kevin Durant's window of winning regular season MVPs sailed when he went to Golden State. Because I just can't see, unless if you see a situation where multiple players get injured and he carries them to 60 wins or something like that.
Yeah, or if he goes out and averages 32 a game or something like that. Like if he
even then, that's difficult to give it to him because there'll be some kind of counter, like say, unless if they win 75 games or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I like I said, I think Durant. Like I said, I hated his move when he was talking about going. Do you remember when he almost went to Boston?
Yeah, and Washington. Washington was a big opportunity for him.
I really wanted him to go to Boston at the time because Boston was still really good at the time, ready to maybe take that next leap, and they didn't have Kyrie yet, and some of these young guys even. I'm like, but
they didn't even have Al Horford yet.
Yeah, but if Durant had gone to that team 3 years ago, and you could have seen LeBron and Durant, and I would have said LeBron would have had the favored team. I would have loved to have seen those Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, I lament him not going to Boston when he had Tom Brady there to sell him on it. I was really hoping to do that. So I hated his move to Golden State, but he's up there as one of the top. MJ's the best scorer of all time, but and I think some people are wrong when they say he's a better scorer. I think it's crazy as far as the variety of scoring ways that Michael had over him, but as far as unstoppable shots, I mean, it's right up there with anybody else. I mean, Kevin Durant is amazing, but because of the whole LeBron fanboy thing, people are making his decision to go to Golden State kind of nullify his greatness. I'm like, no, he's still great, and even though they've had the favored team, he's showing that greatness on the biggest stage. He's even raising his level of play in the finals compared to what he does in the regular season. So I'm like, this guy is absolutely incredible, and like you said, I think he's better than LeBron right now. And I'd like to see him to get his due, even though it kind of makes me cringe, because I'm like, you still.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. I look, I'm not a fan of his either, but I've put up some posts recently talking about this topic entirely and the favorite team concept, and we never heard this when Miami was beating Oklahoma.
No.
We never heard this when Miami was beating an old Spurs team where Tim Duncan was like 37 years old.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they lost in record fashion to that same Spurs team.
Yeah, exactly.
But now all of a sudden, that's the justification. Put it this way. The 2017 Cavs, the defending champion Cavs, they just added Kyle Korver, they still had Kevin Love, they still had Kyrie Irving, J.R. Smith, obviously LeBron James. That was itself a super team.
Yep.
And they were eviscerated in the finals.
Anybody said
now,
wasn't a super team is absolutely, I won't say stupid, but
it was an arms race between the two.
crazy. Yeah, it was no different than the Lakers and Celtics. I mean, in some ways, but yeah, it was two giants. They were the best two teams in the league. And I mean,
everyone knew it. They knew what the finals were going to be well in advance.
Oh, yeah.
Even the playoffs were boring. Even when you got 7-game series between Boston and Washington, nobody paid attention to that because we all knew that Cleveland was going to come in there and just take them out, and it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
Yeah. The point that I wanted to make though is I don't like it. There has to be some consistency from LeBron.
Yeah.
When we're looking at him, and he can't get up there and claim that he wasn't on the super team when he's been on a super team more than he hasn't been in his career, and there's nothing wrong with it. Just own it and admit it. Don't pretend that you're not.
Like I said, you can't say on one hand he's a genius at building teams. LeBron, the great
right,
and then on the other end go, oh yeah, but they weren't super teams. I'm like, well, which is it? If you're going to take credit for it, go ahead and own it. Yeah, he built super teams. He didn't go to a super team, that I get, but he colluded 3 times to get super teams. And like I said, I wouldn't call this last one as much, but look, LeBron's smart. If LA had no talent, he wasn't going there. He just wasn't going to happen. They have talent. They have really good young.
I think he wants to get. I think he wanted to get out of the conference. I think he saw how close Boston got.
I agree with you.
Without Hayward, without Kyrie Irving, and a couple of young studs coming up, or a few young studs, not a couple. We've got to keep throwing Terry Rozier's name in all of this. Yeah. And I think he realized the writing's on the wall. At least if he gets out of the conference now, he was never going to go to Philly. That was not going to work.
No, it wouldn't. No way.
But I think he went to LA under the hope that, well, if it all goes to shit, they've got the ultimate excuse of, well, I went to a team that didn't even make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they have done a fantastic job of clearing cap space. They will be a pretty good player when it comes to free agents, but the kicker in all this is how many free agents truly want to play with him. Paul George could have done it. He didn't do it. I don't see players lining up to play with him because I think they all saw Chris Bosh
and Love.
They all saw Kevin Love. That's an even better example. And no matter what they did in terms of trying to mold their games alongside LeBron gets either all the credit or his role players get all the blame. And that's a total reverse of every superstar that's ever played. How many people blame Hal Gurr for Wilt Chamberlain not winning? How many people blame Michael Cooper for Magic Johnson not winning? How many people blame Dennis Johnson for Larry Bird?
Nobody does that because it's stupid.
But we hear the excuses for LeBron. Kevin Love's trash, or let's start up a petition so Kevin Love doesn't play in the NBA final.
It's insane. It's insanity. I mean, Kobe even said it last year too. He said, "I don't buy into this thing that the Cavs have trash." And like you said, it's the LeBron effect. It's his fan base. It goes back to my book. It's just they're obsessed with any move anybody makes in the NBA. Any bit of NBA news has to come back to proving that LeBron is the GOAT. It doesn't even matter if it's on the Sacramento Kings. They'll find a way to twist it into something that makes LeBron's teammates trash for some reason. It's just it just befuddles me how they do this. And I don't know if this was a real quote from Paul George because I didn't vet it, but I saw a meme floating around after he chose to go back to OKC that he said that if I go to LA and we beat Golden State, then it's LeBron did it. And if I stay in OKC and we unseat Golden State, it's we did it. And I don't know if that was a real quote, so I'm not saying, but even if it's not, it has to be what was thinking was, is Paul George has got a little bit more of that old school thinking. I'm like, I want to do this without LeBron. I want to beat LeBron. I want to beat Golden State without riding LeBron's coattails. Because you're right. They saw what his fan base has done to Kevin Love and Chris Bosh, two future Hall of Famers, undoubtedly Hall of Famers. I just want to put that out there for anybody listening. Both of those guys, and by the time that Kevin Love finishes, because his numbers are going to go up this year, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, just like Bosh. These guys, look at their numbers.
Look at their accomplishments, not just the numbers. Look at their accomplishments. Multiple-time gold medalists, all-star appearances.
In those rings, they've got a whole. I mean, they are bona fide. If they're not first ballot, I would be shocked. If anything, they're second ballot. But they're not Horace Grant. Horace Grant was like a 10-8 guy. Okay, he was a really nice power forward, nice player, great role player. I loved Horace Grant growing up. I'm not going to trash Horace Grant. He's not Bosch and Love. Okay.
Of course.
But LeBron's fan base will say they're the same, and I think that's why people don't want to play with him. Like, they're going to say that I'm a middling one-time all-star if I go play with him? I don't want that.
But how telling is it? You look at the perceptions. LeBron is apparently a guy that makes his teammates better, right?
I know.
Russell Westbrook is apparently selfish.
Yeah.
Why then would Paul George stay in Oklahoma to play with Westbrook as opposed to going back home to LA to play with LeBron?
It's a great point. I don't think that guys particularly like playing with LeBron. Now, because of the politics of the day, and I mean from off the court to on court, the love for LeBron, the league-wide love. Like I said, I'm not going to trash the guy. I think LeBron's doing great things. He's my top 5 of all time. Maybe even up to top 2. He's that good. But you look at the quotes from guys. You have coaches that said that it's the hardest team to coach. You've had players say it's incredibly stressful playing with LeBron. Now they twist it to say that's because he's just so great and so smart. He demands so much. But then you look at the other great leaders from the NBA, from NBA history. They didn't say that about. No, they would say it about Michael because Michael would punch you in the face. But but the difference between Michael and LeBron when it came to leadership and why guys I think liked playing with Michael more is because Michael would uplift you in the toughest moments. Like I can't remember the example. I think it was Paxson or maybe it was either Kerr or Paxson, but he came back to him and said, "You're going to make this. You can make this." It was.
Oh yeah. That was Game 7. He said Stockton was not Game 7, Game 6. Stockton was going to double me.
Yeah. I'm
going to pass you the ball. You're going to take the shot. And Kerr responded by saying, "Yeah, if he comes up, I'll be ready." Yeah. And he hits the shot.
Yeah. It was never. We'll say this. Even though Michael was a bull and no pun intended in practice, he wanted to win everything. He went from.
There's nothing wrong with that, though, because
it's competitive.
What Jordan was doing, though, and if anybody's ever played any sport, they understand this. He was, in his mind, he was toughening you up, because if you could handle me in practice,
yes,
from a psychological or a skill standpoint, you can handle what Reggie Miller's going to throw at you, you can handle what Patrick Ewing's going to throw at you, whoever. And that's what turned Scottie Pippen into Scottie Pippen. That's what turned Horace Grant into Horace Grant. That's what resurrected Dennis Rodman's career, and Ron Harper's career. It turned all those guys around.
Yeah, and not only that, but you have practice versus games. In practice, I'm sure Michael was tough, but he did that. He said to raise the level to when they played the games, it was different. Now, how many times? Go back through YouTube. How many times did you see Michael passive aggressively walk away from a teammate? Ignore somebody, or just straight out yell at them and then give that face and then walk off. How many times did you see that? You didn't see that for Michael Jordan. And you even heard it in his interviews. Even after his first three-peat, he said, "Look, I'm not campaigning to be the greatest of all time." Because Michael was more focused on beating Magic and Larry, who were at the end of their careers, one because of just straight deterioration with Larry, because he just threw his body on the floor every other play. Magic did not diminish in skill. He got HIV. But he wanted to beat those guys. He wanted to beat Isaiah. He didn't care about overtaking Oscar Robertson. But I feel like, and like I said, I don't want to guess what he's thinking. I don't know what LeBron's thinking, but just from reports that I've read, from things out of his camp, he even put it on his 2K. You guys love 2K out there. He put it around the cover. He put GOAT on there. I think that LeBron is obsessed. Just from the outside looking in, it seems like, and he even said these are the things he cares about most. He's obsessed with being the GOAT, and he's thinking about that, I think, with everything that he does at this point in his career. How can I become the GOAT? Whereas I don't think that MJ ever did. And how does that affect you in the games? if things don't go your way and you think it might hurt you in the GOAT argument, you might act a little more passive-aggressive. You might throw a few more temper tantrums. MJ was more like, how can I beat Patrick Ewing? I don't care about anything else. I just want to beat this guy. And that's the difference you saw in leadership styles. And I think it's...
No, that's really powerful. That's really powerful what you're saying, because obviously I'm thinking back to J.R. Smith.
Yes.
And let's forget about the fact that J.R. Smith got the offensive rebound. If he doesn't get that offensive rebound after George Hill's miss, guess what? Golden State, they're going to have a chance to win it. So that was actually a positive.
Yeah.
Even though it could have been a lot more of a positive. It was still a positive even though he dribbled out the clock. But what you're saying is 100% correct. Because if he's focused on becoming the GOAT, right, which is something that you cannot... you can influence weak-minded people or younger people into thinking, oh, he's a GOAT because everyone's saying so. But people that have been around a little bit longer or think a little bit deeper are able to see what's BS and what's not BS.
Yeah.
And you can't just, preach BS to people and expect them to shovel it. Your argument has to be strong, and it has to be for something as powerful as who's the greatest of any field. Now, if LeBron's motivation was to win another championship, he's got to realize, I need J.R. Smith. And not just J.R. Smith, I need the rest of my teammates. I cannot sit here sulking during the break as we're about to go into overtime.
Yeah.
We need me. If I'm the leader, they need to follow my lead. And okay, we're going to overtime. It's shitty. We should have probably at least put a shot up to win. Yeah. But the reality is, I want this game, because if we get one game, anything can happen at that point. We've got the home court. Who knows what happens in game 2? Who knows what happens if there's a little bit of pressure on Golden State's shoulders? We didn't see that. No. We saw a kid. We saw it was akin to a child throwing a tantrum.
It was one of the worst things I've ever seen in professional sports, as far as on the court, on the field of play. Watching that play out, and you saw the extended coverage, I thought, now, I admittedly think he could be as high as number 2 all time on my list, just eye test wise, everything included. To see a guy at that level act that way. Now, I want to be fair too. Kobe had a moment like that when he chose not to shoot in that one game in the playoffs, and when he was really frustrated with Phil and everything. And I get that. Okay, I get that. I'm not, but he did, but visibly showing that kind of drama, I just thought, what message are you? You just said you're the leader of the team, and you know what? Do you remember when they made that funny face at him as the game was winding down in overtime? And what did Curry say? Yeah, what did he say? What did Curry say that LeBron said to him? And this is in the same freaking game. What did he say? He said that LeBron said, "My teammates, I'm the leader of my." I'm paraphrasing. He said, "I'm the captain of my team. My teammates need to see me still trying hard." So he says that in that overtime. Okay.
Yeah.
When just minutes before, he was not that leader. He was not that captain. He was showing his team, because of your mistakes, because I've got 49 points, and because you guys screwed up so bad, you missed a free throw, and you missed basically everything he was saying with all of his emotions and everything, was that we can't win in the overtime period. And then when the game is out of reach, he goes and does a block shot, and then says, that's validation for him being a leader and a captain. I'm sorry. I have not been overly critical of LeBron when it comes to off the court and, or his mindset or anything. I usually like to stick to the stats, but that was one instance where I will criticize him. The guy, he acted like you said, he's like a child throwing a temper tantrum. And it was incredibly hypocritical to 5 minutes earlier of game time say, well, I'm throwing a temper tantrum, and I don't care what my team thinks. They need to see me as a spoiled child. And then 5 minutes later at the end of the game, you block a shot, and then you're going to say that's validation for you being a leader and a captain, that your teammates need to see it. I'm sorry. I don't square those two. It was, I can't believe it.
What do you think the reaction would have been if that was Dwight Howard?
Oh, it would have been, that's just Dwight. That's who he is. Well, you know what?
They would have crushed him. Oh. They would have absolutely killed him. And I'm sure you remember this as well. I mean, this guy is such a joke. He really is. Like, okay, he's a great player, but the theatrics. He could be a professional wrestler or a politician. The theatrics. after they get swept, he comes to a press conference with a bloody bandage on his... Like, are you kidding? What is this? What level will they not stoop?
Like I said, I don't even need to talk about LeBron. Just look at his camp. He's known his camp since high school, okay? All they care about is controlling the narrative. And when you hear about, like, even when we didn't know exactly where he was going to sign, even though we were pretty sure he was going to sign with LA, multiple reports from his camp, his sources close to LeBron, he's interested in controlling the narrative. They want to control the news. They want to control. If there's a leak, it probably came from LeBron's camp. And they are obsessed with...
Of course it does. You know why it... But you know why it always comes from his camp? Because whenever there's drama involved with the Cavs or even Miami, it's always to other people. It's never coming back to... There's never any criticism towards LeBron. It's towards Bosh. It's towards Love. It's towards Tyronn Lue. It's Spoelstra. It's everybody under the sun. It's fair game except for him.
Come on, man. It's because he had a triple-double.
What else could I do? If you gave me those stats, well, I mean, what else could I do? How about being a leader?
What about Westbrook? He had a whole season of triple-doubles. How does that not work the same for him? There's so many contradictions there. It's just, like I said, it's mind-boggling. You just, especially with that tantrum, it always comes back to the teammates. And like I said, I'm glad that Kobe said that. He said, I don't think that this narrative out there that he's got a bunch of trash players, I don't think that's real. And I agree. I've seen all those players contribute at high levels at different teams and with LeBron as a teammate. It's just it's a silly thing, and it's all steeped in this, like I said, daily argument. Ever since he lost to Dallas, it's been every day. Well, yeah, but his teammates, but this. Even before he won his first chance, well, really when he beat OKC, that's when it really went into high gear. It's like, oh, well, now he's got the team around him, but he did it all by himself. Okay.
I know he got those excuses even from the 07.
Oh,
fight.
Yeah, looking back, yes, everybody, oh yeah, you're right. It was, and look, context-wise, a guy in his fourth year, a young guy, leading his team to the finals, I always thought that the 07 finals, making it there, was certainly one of his greatest achievements. I covered this in a book. It was 25 straight points against, Detroit there in fourth quarter and overtimes. It was an amazing feat. I wouldn't put it up there with a ring. And that's where that's where you get stuck on this thing is I'm like, look, if you look at those games, now a couple of those games were blowouts and the Cavs kind of came back a little bit. And, but that was a closer series than people thought, even though they got swept. And I'm like, look at LeBron's numbers. They were well below. And then after Dallas, he was averaging well below his career numbers regular season-wise in the finals, and you're like, what in the world is going on here? Like, this isn't the Spurs are playing. They just played the Mavericks. And but you're right. They go back to 07. I'm like, it was an amazing feat to get there, but that's when you got on the biggest stage. We don't get to pick and choose when players, some guys, some all-time greats never even make a finals, or they only make one, like a Barkley, and it's like,
yeah.
That's.
Or Dan Marino, if we could go to a different sport as well.
Yeah, exactly. But that's your chance. And you know what? I'm sorry that it got there in year 4. Good for you. You made it. Kudos to you. But don't go get swept and average 22 points a game. Go out there and get swept and average your triple-double like he's done the last few years. Go do that.
It wasn't so much that he got swept and averaged 22 a game. It's, okay, if memory serves me correct, I think you're right. A couple of those games were close to being double digits. I think the first two were out there. But the next two games in Cleveland, very winnable games. If memory serves me correct, they were one-possession games.
Yeah.
Towards the end of it. Now, also, if memory serves me correct, because I did do a post about this, and my goodness, the backlash that I got, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. You're right, 22 points per game. He shot 20% from three. And I think it was 35 or 36% from the field, and 70% from the foul line.
For his own,
that's not the worst. That's not the worst of it, though. Let me finish this. The worst of it was, and I remember this stat specifically. He had 23 turnovers in 4 games, out of 27 assists.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And they want to turn around and say that it was his teammates' fault. If anything, his teammates kept them in the games with that kind of production. That's horrible production.
Yeah.
If all he had to do was shoot 40% from the field, and they probably at least go 2-2.
Yeah.
And we saw the year prior, anything can happen in that situation when Dwayne Wade just lit up the Mavericks. And I don't want to buy into this whole thing that the Spurs were a great team at that point, because they've never really been a dominant team. They've been an opportunistic team. There's been times where Duncan has carried them, and there's been times where Parker's carried them, and Ginobili's, but you've never seen all three of them really gel at once.
It's a great point. They're a dynasty, but I wouldn't put them up there with some of the other dynasties, because they were losing in between finals wins. They were getting beat in the first round of the playoffs some years. I'm like,
sure,
that's still the same team.
Yeah, but they were getting absolutely pumped by the Suns or whoever, the Lakers.
Yeah.
The point I wanted to make, though, is if that, and LeBron James fans will absolutely hate this, but the Cavs were the number 2 seed in the playoffs that year for the East.
Mm-hmm.
The Spurs were the number 3 seed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the point that I'm going to make here is either if you're going to say it's a huge mismatch, you're admitting that the conference is very uneven.
Yeah, and that goes against one of the narratives, right?
Exactly. So it's either one or the other. Pick one, because you can't have both.
Yeah, that gets back to the 07 series. I remember in the early days debating with my group of friends on Facebook after the 2011 loss to the Mavericks. I kept pointing out, I'm like, guys, look, he's not even getting his career average. He's not even getting close. I mean, he was averaging like 22 points a game in the finals. Like you said, lots of turnovers. He still had a lot of turnovers later in his career. But, yeah, I'm like, he's not even putting in his best performance. On the biggest stage, we're actually seeing him play the worst that he has ever played up through those first 2 finals losses. And so that was my point to them back then. I'm like, they should have beat. They were up 2-1 against the Mavericks, and he had 11 points in the fourth quarter in 6 fourth quarters. Whereas Dirk averaged like 10 or 11 in the fourth quarter across 6 quarters. I'm like, this is insane to me. And so we have that. This is where you get to the contradictions again. Well, now what are they saying? Well, so back then the excuse was his teammates are trash. It's always the same excuses that his teammates are trash, or he was too young, or like you said, you're ignoring the fact that the East was actually bad, which it was. Now he is actually averaging his triple-double or close to it in the finals. He's still getting beat. And now they're saying, well, you can't hold it against him because he's averaging close to a triple-double. I'm like, okay, so then we can go back to 07 then and say since he didn't, then we should blame him more. Oh, no. You know, it's like, I'm like, there's so many contradictions there. I mean, like I said, it's just.
I've got the stats here, and we'll finish on this. I've got the stats here from that finals. Game 1 was a 9-point victory for the Spurs, 85-76. 103-92 was Game 2. 75-72 was Game 3, and then 83-82.
Yeah, man, at the end there. I'm like,
yeah. And I'm not too sure how close the first 2 games were of the series, but I remember distinctly there was some missed shots, especially with Bowen. But here's the remarkable thing. Tony Parker won Finals MVP. 24 points per game, 5 rebounds, 3.5 steals, 3.5 assists per game, right? Those aren't great numbers. However, he shot 57% from the field and 57% from 3.
Yeah.
If LeBron is that good of a defender, who's apparently a very versatile defender, and gets all the credit in the world for quote-unquote shutting down Derrick Rose, why in God's name is he not guarding Tony Parker? Why is he still sticking with Bruce Bowen, who was 6 points per game? Why is he on him?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I hear this a lot with in the GOAT debate. It's well, MJ's shooting guards weren't as good as LeBron's small forwards that he has to play against, and I'm like, it's debatable, but there were a lot of really great shooting guards in MJ's era. Drexler, Reggie Miller. I mean, you could even go to Mitch Richmond. There were a ton of very talented players that played his spot. So yes, Pippen did sometimes guard the other team's best player, but he didn't guard Gary Payton or Sean Kemp. He didn't guard Malone or Stockton. He didn't guard Barkley. He didn't guard. But Michael played. So I'm like, yeah, but there were times when Scotty would take, maybe the other team's best guard or something like that at times. And I'm like, okay, well, does he guard Kawhi the whole game? Does he guard Durant the whole game? Does he guard some of these other great small forwards, Paul George? No. And if he does, he gets lit up by them. So this whole versatility, and you make a great point. If you can guard the point guard, he guard all 5 spots. Well, first off, we know this is darn near close to a positionless era of basketball, so it doesn't really
right.
But go guard Tony Parker then. I feel the same way when they talked about Chalmers, who played pretty well as a role player in 2013, and it was just awful in 2014. And they're like, well, they didn't have a point guard because Chalmers. I was like, well, why didn't LeBron play point guard? I thought he plays all 5 positions. And I can go back and forth with this all day with LeBron's fan base. Why didn't he guard Duncan the year that they lost? Why didn't come on. I mean, this whole idea, and again, it's all about adding categories, right? Before it used to be rings, eye test, and per game stats, and Michael's MVP, stuff like that. And then when it became very clear that LeBron was never going to match the legendary 6-0, almost mythical status of,
right.
They started adding categories. Basketball IQ, can guard all players, all positions. Just all these things that are like either flat out false.
Basketball IQ, for someone with such a high basketball IQ, why is it that he's so willing to put, he thinks it's a good idea to have either Richard Jefferson or George Hill guarding Kevin Durant? Or,
that's right.
Or why is
you're not getting Scotty on the switch? That's George Hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or Tristan Thompson, right? Or if he's so smart, why is his teammates always underachieving?
Yeah, like I said, does he make everybody around him better? I mean, like I said, I don't see that. I really don't. I see LeBron forcing his style of play on every team he's been on. And if you don't play his style, he wants you traded or he wants you blamed. And if you can't play exactly how he wants you to play, then you're trash, quote unquote trash. And I'm like, I just don't see it, man. I see a lot of players who had their worst years with LeBron James.
Oh, yeah. And we're talking about great players. As you said, first ballot Hall of Famers. Mike, you got any final words, man?
No. I mean, like I said, I don't really need to plug the book anymore. I appreciate you having me on. This was great. I love, some of the topics that we got into. I love some of the all-time lists and stuff. If you're out there, thanks for listening. I had a great time being on this podcast. It's my favorite podcast, obviously. I'm a little biased, but no, it was good. It was a lively discussion. I know we went well over 2 hours, and it's like I said, for me, it feels like 10 minutes. So, it was a great time. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, yeah. Once again, I thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.